Welcome everyone. My name is Rasmus Ölme. I'm a professor and head of research at the Danish National School of Performing Arts. And this is also where we are coming to you live. This is an event called Knowledge in the Arts, and it's organized by like you can see behind me here, the International Center for Knowledge in the Arts. Today we are in one of the rooms in the dance and choreography department. And I'm going to just hand the word over to Christopher Gansing, who will present today's lecture. Christopher?
Yeah, thank you very much, Rasmus. My utmost thanks to you and also the School of Performing Arts for hosting us here today in the fifth of the lecture series, Knowledge in the Arts. And in this lecture series, we, in the spirit of the center, the International Center for Knowledge in the Arts, kind of move across different disciplines in relation to the overall topic of artistic research, and therefore we also try to move to the different institutions in Denmark in the artistic educational landscape as part of this center. And so it's very fitting, I think, that we are here today for the first time at the National School of Performing Arts, simply because we also have a speaker who comes from this background, Esa Kirkkopelto, who will speak, as you see also the title behind me, on art times art, from works to phenomena and back. And I would like to just say a few words about Esa. So I think I got to know Esa originally at the same time as I started as a professor at the International Center for Knowledge in the Arts back in 2020, when he initiated something called the Öresund Collegium for Artistic Research, which I think had a kind of a similar starting experience as I had in terms of programming and events like this, starting in the middle of the pandemic and suffering from that. But I very much enjoyed the few events that I could attend online in this program, which kind of brought together and still brings together artistic researchers from Malmö and elsewhere, as well as kind of highlighting current debates in artistic research. This you are doing from your position as professor of artistic research at the Malmö Theatre Academy, which is part of the University of Lund, Lund University. And previously you have worked at the University of the Arts in Helsinki as a professor of artistic research, I think for 10 years, and then as a couple of years also as the head of the postdoc center for artistic research at the same university, right? But you also have a really interesting, has a background also as a philosopher, and did his PhD in philosophy at the University of Strasbourg. And now I won't kind of go into all the details of his long CV, but he's also a convener of different networks and projects within research, performance, author of numerous articles. You can find, I think, some of this work online. Overall, your research topic is the deconstruction of the performing body, both in theory and practice. And so this kind of also brings me to say a few words, without preempting at all the lecture, I hope, about the topic of today in relation also maybe to the larger question of knowledge in the arts as the topic of this lecture series. I think what is being addressed here, the discussion we're going to have, is also really about a very fundamental question, a very basic question about what do we study or what do we research in artistic research, so kind of a definitional discussion also, what is the subject of research here. And I guess, you could answer that with a very common sense answer that it is simply art, but that is of course too broad. Is it then artworks or is it the art field in general? One could narrow it down and say it's about artistic practice, but that sometimes becomes too narrow and kind of, in my view at least, too focused then on, let's say, improving a certain artistic technique. So in a research context, I think we really need this discussion about what kind of, even ontology and epistemology are we working with. So you need a kind of an idea of what kind of reality you are dealing with and what kind of knowledge you're actually kind of constructing within that. So in drawing, I think, on his background as a philosopher, Esa Kirkkopelto addresses some of these very foundational questions and has set out to interrogate in and through his own artistic practice also how this kind of problems can be addressed, as he says, quotation marks, artistically. And so I really look forward to hear you unfold this discussion and your concepts and methodology for us today. So the word and the stage is now yours, Esa. Please welcome Esa Kirkkopelto.
Thank you, Christopher, for this kind introduction, and thanks Rasmus and Christopher for inviting me here and providing me this opportunity to share my ideas with you today. I have had a very special day. Actually, we already started in the morning with a workshop with some of your people, a 3-hour workshop. So we were very much into practice at that moment. So now I decided to be more discursive and focus more on conceptual argumentation. So I'm not coming up with a lecture demonstration or let alone lecture performance, but more rather like lecture. Double lecture also in the sense that this a bit lengthy 50-minute presentation will be divided into 2 parts, and since this is a hybrid event, I suggest that in the middle we have a short 5-minute pause just to facilitate our concentration. So I just start and read my paper, and I had to try to be slow enough. The international field of artistic research or practice-based research in the arts is currently going through a new latency phase. After the first decades of enthusiasm, institutional development, and increase of the critical mass, we are now in a state where a new turn or reorientation should take place, a turn that should satisfy different agents working and interests prevailing in this field. In this situation, the recent call by Lucy Cotter to reclaim artistic research back to artists themselves, or the term post-research condition launched by the European Artistic Research Network, EARN, function rather as symptoms than as solutions. After having followed the development of this field now during 15 years, today I would also like to provoke a bit and start by claiming that artistic research has not even yet begun. Not at least properly or not really. The reason why this might be the case is that that particular field of knowledge formation has not so far yet managed to find or has refused to define its research object or agree on its research object. And why is that task important or even necessary today? That is what I'm trying to explain in this talk. To do that, I will first tell a bit of myself. Then I let a few other voices speak. And after that, I will address my words to you as artists, and finally conclude by speaking of us as artist researchers. Since 2004, I've been working with a Helsinki-based performance collective called the Other Spaces. The group's activities, artistic activities, have consisted of creation of invented body techniques or exercises through which people, basically anyone who uses them, can enlarge, deepen, or multiply their field of experience towards something that we could call non-human. In 2006, so very early on, the group created a performance based on the epic science fiction poem called Aniara, written in 1956 by the Swedish novelist and Nobelist Harry Martinson. The events depicted in that very special, peculiar poem take place in the near future when humankind has inhabited the nearest planets of the solar system. A space ferry called Aniara commutes between Earth and Venus. Once, during its routine trip, the ship collides with an asteroid. And due to that accident, Aniara loses its course and is slung towards outer space with no hope of return. The spaceship encloses a community which consists of ordinary passengers and crew members. The journey takes decades, and during that time, completely new kinds of internal cultures and cults are born among the travelers, all of them reacting to and reflecting on their common desolate situation. At the end of the novel, everybody simply dies, and Aniara continues on its purposeless trajectory like a collective space sarcophagus. According to the artistic idea of the other spaces, our aim was to rescue the passengers of Aniara by discovering and opening a new dimension to that, as Martinson called it, deadly space where they were doomed. The medium leading to that dimension consisted of the poetic language and at first hand of Martinson's poetry itself. The performance aimed to demonstrate different ways of human bodies to become linguistic or poetic and to embody language in novel ways. And here's a few images of that performance that premiered in 2006 at Kiasma Theatre, but these images, the first performances took place at the gallery space of Kiasma, Museum of Contemporary Art in Helsinki. We were all dressed in unisex underwear, and the point of that was multiple. It carried reminiscence of a certain modernist aesthetic. It communicated with the Scandinavian socio-democratic ideals, and it also helped us to focus on the artistic idea of our bodywork, where we try to simplify our existence and make of ourselves some sort of corporeal components. In these images that you see here, we undergo a phase where we try to embody words or learn to speak again, and it looks and looked like that. We also have a trampoline with which we try to reach the point of weightlessness, a momentaneous one. But anyway, just to prove that we really did it. Well, I wanted to tell this because my personal reasons in 2007, namely the following year, to abandon my career as a theater director and academic postdoc researcher and get involved with artistic doctoral education at the Theatre Academy, Helsinki, were very much the same that the year before had fueled the creation of the Aniara with the Other Spaces collective. Through artistic research, I imagined that I could find an exit to this seemingly enclosed cosmic system whose prisoners we all unavoidably are as physical, chemical, biological, and social beings, and which ultimately has no other future perspective to provide us with than a sure death. According to scientists, notably physicists, death may not only concern human species and all the species, but the whole planet and ultimately the whole universe, which is on its way towards its total darkening, cooling down, and dispersion. Modern science may have liberated us from myths and other superstitious beliefs, but it has also led us to a state of cosmic despair because of which any human effort to make sense of this all is compromised already before it is put into effect. If we do not agree with someone like Martin Heidegger, according to whose saying only a God can save us, is there any other way to maintain hope regarding our survival as a species and salvation as individual beings? Or the other way around, if we agree with someone like Franz Kafka, according to whose saying, there is an infinite amount of hope in the universe, but not for us, then the question follows, how could we become beings worthy of hope? Correspondingly, my working hypothesis with artistic research was the following. If science cannot save us, and if religions cannot do that either, could art still provide us with a source of hope and indicate a direction to strive towards? If yes, would it be the ultimate task and responsibility of artistic research to prove that? And if yes, would not this task and responsibility constitute its ultimate justification in this given historical moment? In other words, the question of the legitimacy of artistic research as a relatively independent field of knowledge formation taking place in the academia or outside them should not just be an institutional, instrumental, or political issue. Instead, the main concern of that question could be in the changed position and role of arts and artists at this very historical moment when the existence of human species, let alone all the other species, is threatened by deadly political and ecological powers. I would argue that once the question of artistic research is juxtaposed with this possibility of fundamental inexistence, we are forced to face a question of the artistic existence and thereby ask, what are we actually making research of? What is the research object of artistic research as a primary instance or agency of that existence, namely artistic existence? I say that this disposition forces us to face the question of the research object, since in a certain way artistic research as a contemporary epistemic movement has acknowledged the existence of that question from the very beginning. Insofar as, according to its premises, arts can function as a medium of knowledge formation in a radical sense. One needs to use the attribute radical here, since there are lots of cases where artistic practice combines quite academic disciplines and their purposes, for instance, with the pedagogical or medical ones. At the same time, the touchstone of artistic research has consisted of projects which claim that they produce a completely new type of knowledge, that is artistic knowledge, whose correlate is a certain kind of reality. In other words, that is ontologically and epistemologically, artistic research has opened a discussion on the reality of art. It has reopened it. No one can deny that art has its own reality, its individual and cultural contexts, according to which we are accustomed to consider when there is art or something artistic. However, as juxtaposed with the previous cosmic perspective, the discussion changes its character and starts to concern the scope and the scale of that reality. Could our reality be more artistic than what we are used to considering or imagining? I say that artistic research reopens this discussion since, of course, it has been run within art philosophy and aesthetics since Plato and Aristotle, at least. What makes the difference now? And for the very first time in the human history, artists themselves have been allowed the right to make truth claims or reality claims, and that is also expected from them. That is also why we need to be sensitive to the difference between artistic knowledge and the aesthetic knowledge, insofar it is based on art philosophy and in this sense aesthetics as a discipline. Artistic practices and aesthetic practices, artistic experience and aesthetic experience, and finally artistic existence and aesthetic existence. The question is not only disciplinarily or institutional. The possibility of artistic knowledge in the radical sense just defined is dependent on it insofar as the existing epistemological framings of art derive from the tradition of Western aesthetics. My next quotes do not solve this dilemma, but highlight its historical relevance. The first one comes from Boris Groys's famous pamphlet Going Public from 2010, where he claims as follows. The shift from a poetic, technical understanding of art to aesthetic or hermeneutical analysis was relatively recent, and it is now time to reverse this change in perspective. In fact, this reversal has already started by the historical avant-garde. A statement like this might enable us to conceive artistic research as an heir or a continuation of the historical avant-garde, or even as its completion. But let me come back to this possibility a bit later. And I'll take my next quote, which locates this rupturing question at the very beginning of modernism in the poetry of German poet-philosopher Friedrich Hölderlin. In his late poetry at the beginning of the 19th century, Hölderlin clearly broke with the principles of classical aesthetics, according to which the idea of a work of art leans on a supposition of the coherent body image. The quote comes from the analysis of Rainer Nägele, who comments Hölderlin's deliberate terminological choices in his famous remarks, Anmerkungen, on the tragedies of Sophocles, in the following way. The shift from Glieder, members, limbs, to Teile, parts, indicate a subtle displacement of the image of the body from the realm of aesthetics. So that is how Hölderlin used to decided to speak of the work of art in terms of parts instead of members. To the degree that the image of the body constitutes aesthetics in the sense that emerges in the late 18th century, it is a displacement of aesthetics itself and a shift to poetics. As Hölderlin remarks, the very term Zäsura, which came out of that important discourse, belongs to the terminology of the poetics of rhythm. And Hölderlin himself also underlines the poetic nature of the logic that he is outlining in this important essay. Following Nägele's argument, we might conclude that the body of the modernist poetics is a dispersed and multiple body with no human model or form, and the modernist artist is supposedly the one who can compose with those embodied elements. Before considering what that might mean concretely, let me introduce my last quote, which comes from Jacques Rancière, and which actually reverses the given terminology between aesthetic and poetic. According to Rancière, the historical shift discussed in the previous quotes takes place between two regimes, of which the previous one he calls poetic and the following one aesthetic. These are probably quite familiar quotes for you, but let them be repeated here. I call this regime poetic in the sense that it identifies what the classical age would later call the fine arts, with a classification of ways of doing and making, and it consequently defines proper ways of doing and making as well as means of assessing imitations. And the second quote, which confronts poetics with aesthetic. The aesthetic regime is of the arts stands in contrast with the representative regime of poetic. I call this regime aesthetic because the identification of art no longer occurs via a division within ways of doing and making, but is based on distinguishing a sensible mode of being specific to artistic products. These two quotes from Rancière indicate firstly that it's not finally a matter which terms we use here as the aesthetic or poetic or aesthetic and artistic, but the way we understand them. We can quite well continue speaking of the field of aesthetics or aesthetic regime if only we are ready to acknowledge the fundamental change that artistic research implies within it. In the field of contemporary aesthetics, there are thinkers like Jean-Marie Schaeffer who also see it necessary to make the distinction between artistic and aesthetic. And in the field of artistic research, we have colleagues like Alex Arteaga and Dieter Mersch who consider art as an aesthetic practice primarily. All in all, this oscillation indicates at least that the relation between artistic and aesthetic is all but clear and requires further discussion and inquiry. And that we over again return to that borderline area we discuss the ontology of artistic research. To me, as an artist researcher, this oscillation means simply that we, namely as a humankind, or at least the Western part of it, we may have not really yet understood what is at stake in art, in artistic mode of acting and sensing. Although we can make it, and we may have done something like art, made something like art since the human species has emerged, do we really know what we are doing? Why art? All the explanations, anthropology, biology, psychology, sociology, cognitive science, or any other science may provide cannot but remain instrumental or functional, referring to evolution, adaptation, social coherence, well-being, etc. Thanks to artistic research, that question is now for the first time usurped from the external experts and addressed seriously to you as an artist or a member of public. Why do you do it? And why do you like it? No matter which is your answer, no matter which of your answer to these questions or how you formulate your answers, they supposedly imply an existential truth claim, that is a truthful relation to what you are not, a truthful relation to what you are not, and what therefore is real to you as an individual me. I'm doing art and or enjoying it only because it's in some way real to me. Or it is real to me when I'm doing or enjoying it. Speaking and thinking about the reality of art implies really that we suppose that our reality is in some extent artistic. But how and to which extent? That is the question. Correspondingly, artistic research could, without compromising it politically, legitimate and establish itself by raising its stakes and by claiming that what it makes research on is the intrinsically artistic and not barely aesthetic aspects of reality. But do even artists themselves believe in the existence of such aspects, in the existence of art outside art, so to speak? that is outside the existing cultural and institutional contexts which foster and valorize artistic activity? I would dare to claim that yes, they do. That yes, you do. At least at the very moment you or we work as artists. We as artist researchers set the question of the artistic construction of reality instead of contenting ourselves with the domains of reality indicated to art and artists. As we do that, we as a matter of fact have already caused a shift in the institutional position of art and its criteria. If artistic practice is redefined as a means of a medium of reality research, we simultaneously detach it from the traditional objectives of art making. Traditionally, the main criterion for artisthood has been based on one's capacity to produce a recognizably skillful and original work of art. However, in difference with an ordinary artist researcher is not primarily a producer but a researcher. So, what do they search for and make research on? This is how I end up to set a question of the research object of artistic research. I know that the topic continues to divide opinions, but I now leave those debates aside to pursue this line of reasoning inaugurated here to see if it brings anything new within our common horizon. And if you may, I would suggest that we now have a tiny pause. Okay, 5 minutes. And okay, so let's start at restart at 3:45. Would it be okay? Good. Thanks. should we try to get restarted? It's such a lovely day outside. I take that as a compliment. Very well, so just before the pause I addressed you a question, personal question regarding the degree of reality you give to your findings as artists. So I will continue on that now. If you ask yourself as an artist, not necessarily as yourself, but yourself as an artist, what you search for as you enter a creative artistic process or as you enjoy it, you can notice that you have some sort of preliminary understanding of it, even though the singular result of the process can never be predicted. If you may have in mind some specific task or work, but at the same time you are also engaged with something less and something more than an entire specific work. One part of you is dealing with some detail of the work, whereas another part already sees beyond its actual realization. Before you have got your work done, you often already think about the next one. If, once again, you try to imagine what you are searching for, and once you have got hold of that something, how you operate with it, you may notice that those things at that moment are real to you, those things that at that moment are real to you and constitute your reality are, as a matter of fact, quite strange looking and strangely behaving entities or events, wild things that in comparison with the surrounding reality do not seem to be real at all. I call those entities or events generically now as artistic phenomena, in distinction to two things. On the one hand, artworks, and aesthetic phenomena on the other. Let me develop the latter distinction first. My reason and need to make a difference between aesthetic and artistic is due to the fact that at the level of experience they seem to refer to two different but often overlapping or mixed states. That is also why they get easily confused. The difference is nevertheless there, and every one of you as an artist has experienced it, I suppose. I just spoke about the moment when you enter an artistic process. That may happen in a routine way, and it may be accompanied by personal rituals and habits, but anyway a certain transition, change, transformation or transposition takes place in your way of encountering and perceiving your surroundings and behaving in it. Every time that happens, and this is my argument now, we undergo and repeat individually the same transition or shift that Greuze, Nägele and Rancière had depicted as taking place historically. In other words, that transition has a transcendental correlate that characterizes the artistic existence itself. In earlier times we used to speak about inspiration. Today we barely have a word for that transitory or extra-daily state. Instead we are inclined to think and talk as if everyone was an artist and as if we were all artists all the time, which is of course not true. Then, all of a sudden, phone rings, or your friend addresses you at the doorway, or you need to go and pick up your child from the daycare, and suddenly you are back in the so-called common reality. But meanwhile, you had been somewhere else. Where exactly? In your studio or workshop? For sure. But during those past hours or so, also that place changed its character. You've been dealing with the material of your work. No matter what the stuff you call your material, What you do with it also implies a certain transformation and in its mode of existence. As you perceive, imagine, or evoke it, touch, fashion, or play with it, it's not anymore what it used to be, and neither are you. You become it, and it becomes you, partly, momentarily, locally. The resulting entity, regardless of what it is, now resides between both of you like a unique inter-object, being you and not you, it and not it at the same time. Although the artistic phenomena that emerge during that process are artificial, technically created, to you they are primary, not derived from or reduced to anything else. For a moment, they are more real than the empirical reality that constitutes the starting point for their emergence. After a while, you can take a step back, come to your senses, have a cup of coffee, reflect on what you did, discuss it with others, and form your opinion on it, like it or not like it, and here we are sliding back in a state of mind and situation we might call traditionally aesthetic. You see that what I'm speaking about is nothing that complicated or speculative. Yet, our understanding of these matters is still today surprisingly, if not alarmingly vague. How to conceive the difference and transition in question? According to my understanding, the change in question has to do with our subjectivity and our understanding of it. Either we think that the change concerns the mode of subjectivity, that an artistic subject is different from an aesthetic subject, or we think that during and within an artistic process, or we think that during and within an artistic process I'm not a subject anymore, not at least entirely. I am inclined to think the latter way, and my reason is the following. Artistic phenomena, once created, discovered, or evoked, are not dependent on my will anymore. They are radically external in relation to my volition, perception, and body, although they are also somewhat dependent of someone's bodily existence. They have their particular objectivity. To paraphrase Marshall McLuhan here, the artistic phenomena are like anesthetized extensions of us, whereas aesthetically, I never lose for a second my sense of being me, of my existence, and the meaning of the artistic phenomena for it, to me. The artistic phenomena do share something with my body, but that something goes beyond my cognition. I can only sense it, feel it, and reflect it afterwards aesthetically. Generally, I would call the modality of artistic phenomena virtual, in difference from the bare imaginary or fictional, to underline their quasi-independent existence. Once again, the terminological choices may vary. What really matters is that we recognize the reality of the transformative difference taking place here. Transformative difference taking place here. All artistic phenomena are virtual, but not all virtual phenomena are necessarily artistic. Behind the cultural, conventional, or contextual differences resides once again different way of orientating oneself and operating with the given objects. Generally, the virtual phenomena are born virtual as a consequence of the transformative operation I consequently call virtualization. The topic is large, I admit, and would require a separate elaboration. Here, I content myself only with one distinctive feature of the virtual experience and operations, namely its multiplied nature. Empirically, it might mean that we first imagine something and then consider it second time as if it were a real thing. By contrast, and the point of view of the artistic phenomenology that I'm actually outlining here, the thing resulting from the artistic virtualization should be considered as something primary, as a genuine mode of givenness of all things that an artist searches for and discovers over again in ever new context and ever new ways. The potentiation in the arts, the art times art, art multiplied by art, means simply that in the arts we encounter and consider artistic phenomena first artistically. A scenic performance always consists of a scene within a scene. A painting is always a painting in a painting. A musical composition is born in the musical universe, a poem in the poetic one, etc. The so-called mise en abîme, a picture in a picture, is not an exception but a rule in the arts, the fundamental way for artistic phenomena to exist and appear. This artistic mode of existence has a fundamental self-reinforcing and potentiating quality which requires both some effort, skill and understanding. Therefore, that mode of existence distinguishes itself from the more habitual or easier modes, but is no less real. The potentiation I'm speaking about constitutes the inherent aspect of all artistic creation. In artistic research, by contrast, it is used explicitly as a means of reflection to question what really happened and appeared during the creative act. This reconsideration does not lead to a free and uncontrollable extension of horizons. On the contrary, it allows us to stop that psychological and therefore subjective process, bracket it and consider artistic objects in their impossibility and strangeness, to follow and study their own logic, their own poetic logic. Although artistic phenomena are strange and wild, we as artists preliminary know quite much about them in advance, else our search and research would be blind. According to the preliminary understanding that is necessary for an artist and that makes our perspective artistic, we know that artistic phenomena are and must be, and here's my list of very schematic attributes, they must be artificial. They are technically created and received. Their existence is dependent on a certain kind of original production and reception. Nevertheless, we consider them as primary phenomena, as something real and given as such. And they are corporeal, undoubtedly. They address and touch our bodies and communicate with it, and that corporeality includes their likeness, namely mimetic aspects, and their feel, namely their affective aspects, and their consistency, which allow us to consider their contour or form as different from their contents. And corporeality, furthermore, implies plurality, since a body is recognized and it recognizes itself only in relation to another body, partes extra partes, like Jean-Luc Nancy did not cease to repeat. And corporality, furthermore, implies singularity. There are no two artistic phenomena that would be identical. Next feature, componential. Artistic phenomena can be combined. One can compose with them. They can function as components, the parts of composition. And this componentiality implies the participatory aspects of artistic phenomena. Encountering an artistic phenomenon requires that I enter in some sort of interplay with it, that I to some extent become one with it, or partly it. And it enables me to become a component in larger constellation or composition, as an audience member, for instance. The next attribute is material. They are made of something, and they consist of something that touches us as material beings. They can also function as a material of a creative production, so nothing more obvious. But that materiality was also transformed. That's why I'm inclined to call it a virtual matter. Within an artwork, There is matter, but it is transformed matter. It is very strange matter that fills the artworks. No one knows what it is. And maybe, yeah, it's a mystery. They are multimodal. The artistic phenomena address different registers of sense, visual, auditive, tactile, olfactive, taste, proprioceptive, as well as different registers of expression, written, oral, gestural, symbolic, mimetic, and so on. At the same time, and evoke sensorial associations between them. Artistic phenomena are rhythmic. They emerge and develop in space and time, since rhythmic is always both spatial and temporal. They are dimensional, by which term I mean that the artistic phenomena open their own dimension of reception, which once again we might call virtual. And they are linguistic. We can speak about them, and they can speak to us. All arts can include in themselves linguistic elements. Literature is an artistic genre. Poetry is an artistic genre. Poetic is a sign of excellency in all arts. They are transformed. The creative production transforms the way of appearing of the material it operates with. Any object can become an artistic phenomenon, like in the case of ready-made. Any material whatsoever is susceptible to become a part of an artwork. But the condition is that it undergoes certain transformation. And they are transformative. Artistic phenomena may change their way of appearing, either by themselves, in relation to other artistic phenomena, like they do in composition, installation, or assemblage, or in relation to their actual context, namely in relation to non-artistic phenomena. And they are most obviously imaginary as well. The artistic phenomena address and evoke our imagination without being completely imaginary beings. The existence of artistic phenomena is therefore ambiguous. They are and are not. They are virtual. They are playful. And last in my list is transmedial. They can jump or be transposed from one medial context into another, one work to another, and etc. But feel free to complete this list from your own point of view. I don't pretend that this is exhaustive, but these things came to my mind just at first hand. Any case, you can notice that the phenomena we are dealing here are quite fabulous, if not miraculous, and quite complex. If you try to think or imagine all these aspects together, namely, you notice that the task goes far beyond your imaginary capacities. And yet, they should be thought together to make justice to the complex nature of these phenomena and to their reality. Finally, what makes the process of producing an artistic phenomena different from the other modes of virtualization is the existential charge of the process, which is related to the dimensional creativity of these phenomena, their propensity to virtualize and transform their surroundings according to their singular logic, their capacity to open new and previously unknown and non-existent dimensions. Artistic technique and thinking consist of pursuing that logic towards the desired ends. Traditionally, that end has consisted of a work of art. But once we recognize the quasi-independent existence of artistic phenomena and start to understand how they behave and study it, we might also do something else with them. This option returns us to my initial question of the ontological, epistemological grounds of artistic research and its self-legitimation. The ontological redefinition of artistic existence would help us to relate ourselves to more critically and more autonomously to the epistemic expectations that, especially in the academic context, are imposed on artistic research. On the one hand, if we were able to liberate artistic processes from the compulsion to create an artwork as an aesthetic object, we might revive the avant-garde dream of the artistic life, including its political, pedagogical, and ecological aspects. That could be a way to re-establish artistic research as a transdisciplinary activity. On the other hand, we might start to study seriously the artistic construction of reality, that is the way in which artistic phenomena behave within and without human culture, contributing to the generation of beings and their interaction. This kind of study, in turn, would be meaningful only in a dialogue with more established modes of knowledge formation, that is, in an interdisciplinary setting. To conclude, by giving to this presentation a title, Art times Art, I simply meant that in artistic research we consider artistic processes and practices artistically, respecting the artistic way in which phenomena we encounter as practitioners and researchers appear. I'm not fully sure if this is yet a common state of affairs. That is also why at the beginning I dare to doubt if artistic research has really begun yet. But every time it does, it implies that we cease to consider artistic phenomena and to speak about them in aesthetic terms, that is, from the subjective point of view. It may be that art has never been made for us to relieve our miserable existence, but for those about to come, within or without us, for those whom the universe could open as a dimension of hope. The existence of artistic research means that we should finally take a full responsibility of this fact that we, as member of the human species, have always somehow tacitly known. Thank you for your attention. So,
I think
do we still need another break before questions?
Do you need one?
Possible questions, or I don't need, but if you like.
No, then I think we go to the Q&A.
If you are ready to come up with your comments, then we can maybe simply go forward.
We will see. But thank you very much, Esa. It was
You're welcome.
Incredibly rich, and also to have this index at the end of artistic phenomena to think further with, I think is very rewarding also. And well, we thought that Rasmus and I have a couple of questions, but we also want to bring in you as early as possible, depending on how active you are in your minds now. We will or will not then also have further comments and questions. We will see. But maybe you want to start, Rasmus.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Esa. I have a few questions. I thought about this where you started talking about the Aniara, and how you worked with that, and you set off with this image of this collective sarcophagus in space, and how that's that sort of cosmic aspect, and at the same time speaking about artistic research and the sort of art multiplied by art, where art sort of turns on itself or applies itself to itself, and it gave me a sort of a sensation of something very microscopic towards something more cosmic, And at the same time, I feel like you're addressing artistic research, and you're raising the stakes of what artistic research could be able to do in the world. And so then I thought about like how the world was everything sort of between this microscopic into that macro or cosmic, or at least maybe terrestrial. There's a huge in between in those dimensions there. So I was wondering how your thoughts, what your thoughts are about like the world, which are not, how this applies not to that fictional stage space that I know that you're also interested in, but like everything between that, like microscopic to that cosmic level. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Philosophically, these suggestions very much contribute to this larger tendency, especially in post-humanist philosophy, to compromise the notion of the world, and there have been statements that worlds don't exist, or world does not exist, and we can't think our existence anymore in worldly terms. One obvious political aspect of it is the failure of globalization, where during a few years at the beginning of the new millennium we believed in the possibility of a kind of common world, no matter how is it constructed, but anyway a common world. And now we are in a situation where we live in a very polarized worlds, very completely, if we want to think about this ongoing war where large populations live in a completely different kind of worlds. And maybe this is symptomatic that something is happening or happened to our very conception of the world. That's one way politically. The second aspect is, let's say, the more let's relate to the phenomenology and the kind of phenomenological obsession with the idea of world that especially in Husserl, in Heidegger or Merleau-Ponty, that there is some sort of pre-given world where we are being born and involved with. In Merleau-Ponty, the embodiment is almost like the synonym of being in a world, that our world is born, embodied, and so on, where the world is rather like a kind of answer than a question. And I think this type of phenomenology that I'm outlining there is very much also like compromising that phenomenological world conception. It does not mean that we would not have some meaningful, how to call them, totalities of meaning that the worlds are. The worlds are self-referencing totalities of meaning, but they become radically relativized. By Charles Martinson has a theory of that in his fabulous essay from 1938 called Vintergatan, or how was it called? No, Stjärnsången, Star Song. He speaks about temporary absolutes or provisional absolutes, and we should become like more creative perhaps with our worlds, that we can create that kind of temporary or provisional absolutes and believe in them and trust in them conditionally, while seeing that there is something beyond them, and they are numerous and innumerous amount of different kind of worlds.
Thank you. Yeah, I was when I had that question to you, and I was reflecting on it myself, and I thought about you're bringing up Rancière as one of the references, and his discoveries in the archives of the proletariat, to how they were dreaming not of the capital means but also of aesthetic experience.
Yeah.
And in a way I was thinking about this like this assumption, and at the end of your paper here you also mentioned this realizing this dream of an artistic life, which is maybe not so tied down to the artwork and the aesthetic experience as something that's available to everyone all the time.
That's very good. I think that's another way to undo world and worlds. But well, it's finally quite utopistic aspect in that instead of world we could like share some sort of aesthetic sphere and relate ourselves freely and reinvent, redistribute it and keep on sharing and but yeah, that's beautiful, but yeah,
it's an artistic reality.
But at the same time, Rancière is an anarchist. Politically, he's an anarchist. So it relates to that, but that is definitely an utopian aspect in that, and I would love to believe in that. I'm not sure if I can do it.
Yeah.
Yes, and we can in this framework I'm creating. I could please with the idea of Rancière's aesthetic regime, but at the same time, I think it does not suffice to just enlarge it, namely to invite more and more agents to it, but we should also deepen it. And this arts mean here precisely going deeper and in that field and that step towards deeper dimensions entail transformative aspect to this, and that I don't find in Rancière really.
Yeah, I to finish off this question, there was a phrasing that you mentioned when you were inside an artistic process or experiment or something, and then the world calls you back, the other common world calls you back, and then you said this like you come to your senses, and I thought about that expression of coming to your senses, because I feel like an artistic process is very much is going towards the senses. So it was just a reflection. Well, what does that mean there? The come to senses in a way isn't it more the opposite, or?
Well, that's playful, but okay. Art may also mean going out of one's senses, and I mean this. I refer to inspiration and kind of things, that there is something ecstatic in the art. Yeah, absolutely. But we should not be afraid of that. We should study it. I mean, this ecstatic is precisely this transcending aspect in art that opens the exit to this deadly universe, as I said. And second thing is that especially in phenomenological aesthetics, we very much underline the sensoriality and senses and things like that. But I'm not sure if art has at the first take to do with senses. For me, it's more and more a kind of imaginary issue, or let's call it imaginary, or things in arts are born as imagined, and in arts we believe in the existence of imagination outside imaginary processes that are independent of us. So things appear as primarily as something like things, not just bunch of kind of sensorial influence or anything like that.
Okay. Yeah.
Because only a body, we also speak about touching and that kind of tactility, but only a body can really touch in my mind. There's no incorporeal touch. And if we have a body, we have already quite a lot, and it's much more complex. And if the body is not given, like in the body phenomenology, if it makes a problem to us, like in my mind, in arts, the body makes a problem because we are making bodies. Then you see this kind of sensoriality becomes problematic as well. But yeah, that about senses.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Christoph. I'll hand it over to you again.
Yeah, maybe I'll try to just riff further on a bit of this discussion. I was thinking if there is like a project of maybe like democratization in your thesis here on artistic phenomena in relation to, if I may kind of generalize, that traditional aesthetics is based on this division between, let's say, the site of production, the site of reception, the producer, the receiver, and so on, and these kind of dichotomies, on which also like a bourgeois, the idle bourgeois kind of sphere of art world is constructed, and also the circulation of artworks in an economy and so on. So is shifting towards the artistic phenomena also a move away from, speaking of worlds, the art world, the professional artist, and also disciplines? Like, now I know you wanted to do the deepening, as you say, which is another thing, but that relates to artistic research. This is more a question on a general kind of spirit of this project, if there's a democratization there.
Absolutely, that's what I'm aiming at. And as we could like detach art from the imperative of artwork and shift the focus on artistic phenomena, it would not compromise. It would not be applied art automatically. I mean that if we could like understand that artistic phenomena are accessible to all of us, and we all encounter them. We are not just used to recognizing them as their artistic nature or their specific nature as compared to other phenomena that we might meet. So then it would change the perspective. That then we might think that okay, artworks would be like examples of this artistic nature of our reality. They are like crystallization, but they were like special cases of this artistic phenomenality that is common to all. So in that sense, the artworks also could adapt that educational role that was also one of the premises of Rancière historically, as he over again returns to this Schiller's idea of aesthetic education. But then it would not be arts pedagogy or applied arts, but like a kind of artworks would be the means for familiarizing ourselves with the mode of experiencing that we all have, and become attentive to it. And yeah, can you follow what I'm? So it really turns this hierarchy. That the artists are not above us, but they are like a kind of guiding us to notice what is common to us, and all the time available to us. So that is how it is. In principle, it goes. That was come to democratization. It is always combined with the question of equality, and that's why I like this kind of verb to speak about equalization. That is also a process that we can in law and in principle level we can decide that all things are equal and so on and so on. But at the practical level, equality always requires certain kind of measures. And those measures, those actions are actually equalizing actions. And if they are equalizing actions, there's actually transformative actions. So that certain group of people become equal. Then we agree that we are equal, we are similar according to certain features. So we basically, either we think that we simplify ourselves to some extent, our existence, or restrict it deliberately in order to be more equal, or we think that we adopt together some sort of equal, some sort of a role according to which we are equal, but we are never completely equal to each other. So only part of us become equal, and according to that part, we can state that, okay, in this situation, we are equal. And it is very much to doing with, we can study that thing in different kind of participatory practices, but also that's why participatory practices has this interesting implicit political potential. So it is a practice of equalization, and equalization requires transformation, and it is corporeal at the very end. So that is how these things can be linked together.
Okay. Yeah, is there a question here in the room?
And in that case, you should speak in the microphone for the stream. And we also, I should have mentioned, you can, for people out in the online space, there were a few actually, and they can post questions in the chat, and they will be read from a person here. Yeah.
Excuse me, and thank you so much for your presentation. And in my scattered notes, I think there are so many questions, and also because you address many questions that we have in the field of artistic research in Denmark, which is, of course, a very young field, I guess, in relation to other very young fields, but even very, very much younger here in Denmark, you could say, as a field within the institutions. And so one of the discussions that are going on right now is the question of the artwork as central to artistic research. And also what I'm hearing you say is to step back from the application of art into products, into artworks, and to work more or to study more the experience, the artistic experience and phenomena. And it would be interesting to elaborate a little bit more on I don't know how, I mean, you already elaborated for 1 hour on it, but it's just a very heated discussion, I think. Not heated, but it's a big question right now. Do we, in artistic research, do we have to have almost a kind of a criteria that there should be a work of art in the end of it? Which also then, you could say, raises the question, then, who can do the artistic research? Then it has it then to be artists doing it, because they're producing the works of art. And then maybe to elaborate on that question, it was very interesting to hear you talk about how the difference between aesthetic and artistic phenomena or experiences, and how what artists are capable of, and maybe what they could bidrage med, contribute with, is exactly insights to artistic experiences, and maybe to disseminate ways of for other, to democratize more ways of to non-artists, if we can really dichotomize like that, but ways of working, learning, and developing our I guess abilities or capacity to enter into this kind of experience, because as you said, we all have the capacity or the potentials to do so, artists and non-artists. So it's just the talk you gave today is, to me, a very interesting both punch, you might say, and also contribution into these discussions about who does artistic research, who are kind of allowed to do it, and do we need the artwork in there in order to be able to research? Are we researching on it or through it or in it and so on? Does it make sense?
Absolutely. I might pick a few of those motives, that there were quite many of them, but first of all, I think it is important that we keep hold of this idea that the doer or agent of artistic research is an artist or someone capable of as I mentioned, even if we keep hold of this framing of that I'm suggesting that artistic phenomena, the person who should be able to produce them, create them, evoke them, call them forth. So that person does not be a professional artist, but he or she should be able to do that, what artists do.
Yes.
Right, well, first of all. Secondly, I think that the position of artwork in artistic research is displaced as relation to arts field. So I think that is necessary to acknowledge. If we acknowledge the situation that it is in the same position, then we end up to stances that have sometimes also quite widely defended that the priority is in the excellency. But if we think that the point of artistic research is to produce excellent art, then we end up to a quite bizarre idea that artist doctor is definitely a better artist than artist non-doctor, which is a problematic statement. But that's where it leads up. Just to mention that example, why it would be contradictory. So I think in the position of artwork there is a shift, and but it still enables to make artworks within the framework of artistic research. But then what is then argued by making artworks? It is something different than just making an excellent artwork. Yeah. Maybe that kind of things to get started. And well, in my and also my one of those reasons that I ended up to this logic, there are very many reasons for that, is the disciplinary landscape where we are in many more developed academic contexts, where very much is emphasis is put on different kind of transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary opportunities, and especially if we think about what artistic doctorate are trained, what they are trained for, they become postdoc artist researchers, whatever they might be. But one thing is sure, that the expectations are in this kind of transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary context. They do work with other scientists or researchers from other fields, and then they do. So what do artists do in those contexts? That's my question that I've been asking. What do they research on? And my attempt, as I ended up to, and as I concluded, if we could agree that, okay, they study the artistic phenomena in this field, then we could have a kind of preliminary agreement on their research object, according to which they could work on more equal basis with the other researchers coming from more established field of knowledge, so that the artists in these constellations would not end up into marginal position or exceptional position or decorative position or whatever minor position. So that is one of those reasons, but there are so many other reasons as well. But thank you for your comments.
Is there another question here?
This is Pablo. First, he has a comment to you. He says, I very much agree with Mr. Kirkkopelto's initial assertion that artistic research has reached a stage where it should now be rendered back to artists themselves. And then he asks, these findings you reach, how did you reach them? What is your methodology? Is it transmissible? And can it, the method, not only the findings, be appropriated by artists?
I'm not sure if I heard well the question. Could you repeat it, or should I comment?
I will repeat it.
Yeah.
Slower?
Well, maybe.
Okay. These findings that you reached, how did you reach them? What is your methodology? Is it transmissible? And can it, the method, not only the findings, be appropriated by artists?
Yeah, thanks. Okay. As I mentioned at the beginning, in the morning we had a 3-hour workshop where I developed my way of approaching artistic phenomena and study them artistically. So I definitely, this is nothing speculative, so I forgot to mention at the beginning that all this can be, at least to some extent, be like demonstrated. And this list of things, attributes, as you mentioned, in regard to any artistic phenomenon in any arts field, it can be studied according to these attributes and undoubtedly many other attributes that they may have in order to, although those phenomena are singular, they have their logic of singularity and that can meaningfully be approached and studied. But first of all, you need to produce it, you need to create it, and then you can reset yourself and to your peers a question: what's really happening? How do we understand it? And a comparison and variation is then in a key role, not only within one art field but also between the art fields. So variation is in this respect a very powerful means of methodical means to proceed. But there definitely are ways to study this and in very concrete ways.
Yep.
Yes, thank you so much. I have a question. I'm not sure if it's only for Esa or if it could be for anyone in the room. So,
Good.
Rasmus and whoever wants to answer. It's maybe kind of a reflection I'm having based on what you're saying, Esa. Thank you so much. I have been in a discussion with other artistic researchers about this. I'll start a little away from your talk and then get into specifics of what you said. So I've been in a discussion with someone, other artistic researchers about the question: if we have imagined an artistic research process where there's artistic results and there's an artistic process that contains reflections and objects that are created as a tool for creating the final work. Are those objects created? Are they art? Is the process art? Are the reflections art? It's another way of asking a similar question than was asked in your lecture. To have this reflection, not to make a dichotomy between the artwork and the process around it. Sometimes the process around it is art as well. And this leads me into more direct dialogue with what you've been talking about. So, what is art in the artistic research process? Is it only the physical or sounding result, or is it the whole process that is art? And the question about the Lucy Cotter question you mentioned about reclaiming artistic research, of course, has to do with is it the artists or the academics who talk about artistic research, but also a question about not just how it is done, but who it is, who is allowed to do it. So some criticists of the I forgot the name of it, the statement, European Statement on Artistic Research. I forgot the name of the document. Some of the criticism of that document has been that it risks becoming a power grab by a specific academian approach to artistic research. And what I'm trying to say is it's of course not just a struggle about the definition, but also who have the privilege of being, what kind of artists have the privilege of being affiliated with those institutions. So my question, now I'm getting there, sorry for this really confusing detour, is I really loved the list you made of the phenomena as artistic, artificial. And you said corporeal, material, and I just started to wonder: could we imagine artistic research conferences where all lectures were corporeal and not just reflective? I mean, where the lectures, the way we speak about artistic research. I know you said you could have, you did a lecture performance earlier today, and I wish I had seen that. There was something about that list, especially the corporeal, the material, transmedial. And my question is, I know it's very confused. It's something about if we can consider the process and the objects around the artwork as art, and can we consider the reflections as art, and would that, if we were to insist on that, would that require that we aim for our reflections and our sharings of reflections to become more corporeal, material, transmedial? I think that's the question.
Well, thank you. I think that is already taking place as in different art universities. We organize research events, colloquia, symposia, like I had been creating at the Theatre Academy Helsinki. We created this Karpa biennial colloquium for artistic research in performing arts, and we have always been like focusing on practical presentations. And everywhere else, there is this term research exposition introduced by, Society of Artistic Research and Michael Schwab in particular. And that's exactly what is it about. They are participatory settings which have which vary with these different aspects. And that's, in my mind, that's the very specific peculiarity of specificity of artistic research, that it takes place in this kind of performative settings. That it really takes place. It's not just reports, but something done elsewhere. But it takes place in that kind of peer-to-peer situation, which composes it can consist of very different kind of elements, and focusing on concrete aspects of art making and making it shareable. There were so many things that you mentioned. I'm not sure, should I come back to them? One problematic, actually as early as 2004, 3 or 4, Anna Pakes argued in favor of a need to think artistic research more in terms of objects, so what it produces, instead of practice, because especially in the UK context, artistic work was very much articulated according to practice, that it's practice-based. But as Anna Pakes indicates, it's not sufficient, that, and especially in, not only in visual arts, where it's obvious that something material is produced, but also in performing arts, we are really producing something, or we are creating, we are making things that subsist with have their maybe ephemeral, but nevertheless existence of their own. And then there the practice alone does not grasp it. And maybe this gives me an occasion just to mention that as I speak about this redistribution or rearticulation, I'm not saying that the people, the artistic research who are now working in the field would not work like properly. I think I rather think that actually we as artist researchers work in these terms. It's just a matter of rearticulating of what we do and in a new way. That as artist researchers, any artist researchers is dealing with artistic phenomena, as I have tried to indicate in this intervention of mine. So I'm not like trying to discriminate some artistic research from others, but I just rather try to find a unifying and common logic. Yeah.
Yes.
well, there's one Ken Friedman who asked if we can publish, or we would publish the text. So I guess that's a question to to us as a center and to you.
It is Christoph who can answer it.
Yeah.
Actually, I think the question, I saw it on the chat, is rather if we would immediately release this text, which we do not plan to. I'm sure you can get in touch with Esa if you want to have the text, or he can decide. But we, in the long run, we're planning to put out an anthology where hopefully we can also include Esa's lecture in article form. But that's not like tomorrow. So.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, I would like to publish this at some point, sooner or later.
Then Anthony Morton has a question. He asked, can you further characterize what constitute artistic phenomena and the intrinsically human, are they intrinsically human dependent? And
Yes.
are they inherently existential? And are they inherently communicative?
They are inherently communicative, and they are inherently existential. They are not inherently human. They are more than human. No doubt about that. And that's the aspect of promise or hope in them. That we as humans are obsessed by them and attracted by them. But they definitely go over us in so far as I understand them. I think it's my doubt. I try to prove it. Actually, I really try to prove it, even in scientific terms, that our understanding of language and language acquisition actually is funded, is based on the presupposition of artistic phenomena. That otherwise I can't understand. I've been thinking of this. I can't understand these different kind of transpositions from one linguistic medium to another. For instance, of speaking to sign language and so on. So I have a hypothesis that these different kind of translations of written to oral and so on and so on. So these translations presuppose the functioning of those entities that I have called here artistic phenomena. So their mode of existence is very special. That's why I introduced this term virtual, to make this understandable. And yeah, well, about the humanness. We can perhaps become like them to some extent, but not necessarily entirely. But we can try.
Okay. Yes, one more here. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you again. Would you please read out the very final sentence of your paper? I didn't get to write it all down.
The existence of artistic research means that we should finally take a full responsibility of this fact that we as members of the human species have always somehow tacitly known.
Thank you. We will try to carry that home. But speaking of responsibility, there's, let's say in dialogue with coming artistic researchers and also people that are already in the practice, the question of ethicality is always often seem difficult to address. So people can speak of artistic methods and maybe products or byproducts, but it seems to me that even if there's an ontological perspective and epistemological perspective, that your text and your presentation is very much about ethics, the ethics of artistic research, or am I misunderstanding that?
No, but this is the very first time I put my words in these terms.
Yes.
So, as I mentioned, I started almost like a kind of a personal confession why I'm doing that, why I'm doing that, and why I started to do this. And this, obviously, the visions are in this respect ethical. Yeah.
And
Or yeah,
do you
even spiritual, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you find that now that you say spiritual, sometimes I also experience maybe that some researchers, since it's going on in, you could say, academic institutions, that the spiritual aspect are toward, ecstatic, also the ecstatic experiential aspects of artistic research should be downsized because it doesn't go well in an application process. So it's hard to explain. Do you follow? I mean, how could we spark this perspective on it? Or it seems to me that that's also what it's very much about. Anyway, thank you for that.
Thanks.
Christopher, do you still have a question or so?
No, not more than, not a question, but a final thank you, I think, and that we should give Esa a hand and for giving us not only these 2 hours, but also the whole day with the workshop before. And yeah, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Esa.
Thank you.